I want to talk with you about something very urgent and also very important. If you're facing a lot of frustrating problems in your life, if there's growing tension in your marriage, if you and your kids quarrel often, if you're reporting to a difficult boss, you're not alone. We live in a world that's frustrated and angry. It's contagious. It's getting worse, and many people are losing hope. I want you to know that there is hope. There is a sure way to solve your most difficult problems and resolve conflicts. I want to teach you about what I call the third alternative. I chose this as the title of my new book because it's about looking past the conflicts you face to a third way. It's not your way or my way, but our way, a better way. You can solve virtually any problem you have by applying the principle of the third alternative, which I like to call the principle of hope. Here are some examples of what can happen when you go for a third alternative. A father rescued his troubled daughter from years of despair and near suicide in one surprising evening. A manager saw in one employee's demand for a raise a chance to double the size of the company. A policeman cut his town's juvenile crime rate in half. A high school principal raised the graduation rate from 3 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. The third alternative book contains dozens of outcomes like these. This is the first of 5 short videos we're going to show you in the next few days. These videos will help you understand how to go for third alternatives in your personal and professional life and in your relationships. Let me introduce my co-author, Dr. Breck England. He will be presenting these videos. As the writer of most of our current training courses at Stephan Covey, he has worked with us for more than 20 years. Breck, why do you think this principle is so needed today?
Well, Stephen, every day people wake up troubled by complicated, hard problems. Problems at work, at home, everywhere. There are relationship problems, financial problems, work problems. But you know, the real problem with our hardest problems is that we get stuck in the mode of thinking there are only 2 alternatives. That there couldn't possibly be a third alternative. You have to lose so I can win. That's why you see wives versus husbands, employees versus bosses, children versus parents, sales versus marketing, the middle class versus the rich, environmentalists versus developers, conservatives against liberals. But there's almost always a third alternative. That's why we need this book now.
What I call 2 alternative thinking splits the world into opposing battlegrounds. Third alternative thinking is rare, but it is the solution to our deepest problems. It starts with shifting our paradigms in 4 significant ways. The first paradigm is how I see myself. If I always have to be right, if my self-worth and identity are tied up in my territory or in my side of a quarrel, then I'm not seeing myself for what I really am. A worthwhile human being in myself, capable of independent thinking. I can see past my side to other points of view without worrying about my own self-worth. The second shift is how I see you. If I stereotype you, you become a thing, a representative of a side, rather than a whole human being. On the other hand, if I see you as whole, as a person, a sister, a brother, a child of God, I will value your perspective and want to deeply understand you.
The third paradigm shift is to seek out different points of view instead of defending myself against them. This is kind of unnatural, so it takes some work. I've made this paradigm shift. If I can approach you and say, you see things differently, I need to listen to you, and mean it. The fourth paradigm shift is to synergize with you instead of attacking you. Synergy is the process of finding third alternatives. It's the recognition that there are infinite, rewarding, exciting, creative alternatives to our problems that we haven't even thought about yet. It's the recognition that the future doesn't just happen to us. Together, we can create the future we want to have.
In the search for the third alternative, you don't just solve your problems, you transcend them. Arriving at a third alternative can be so exciting and energizing, you might even forget what the problem was in the first place. Getting to the third alternative is a 4-step process, and tomorrow you will learn the first of these 4 steps. As you watch the coming videos, Breck will help you discover the complete process for solving your most difficult problems. I encourage you to fully invest yourself in learning how to live by the principle of the third alternative. I believe in you and know you can find greater purpose, fulfillment, and peace in your life. I wish you well on your journey.
In this first video, we will overview the third alternative process, show you how to arrive at third alternatives. We'll also touch on the first step in that process. Usually when you get into a fight or a quarrel with somebody, you go through 4 phases. The quarrel starts when you ask the other person for more than they're willing to give. Your young teenager asks if you can take the car and you're not willing to go along. You ask your boss for a raise, but she balks. The second phase is when everybody justifies themselves. Your teenager asks, "Why can't I take the car?" You give your reasons against. He rebuts them. You try to justify your request for a raise, and the boss rebuts you. This phase can go on for a long, long, wearying time. In the third phase, the quarrel disintegrates into haggling. You say to your teenager, "All right, you can take the car if you'll pay for gas, wash it, call me every half hour," and so forth. Of course, your teenager bargains back at you. "Will you pay half? Can I wash it next week?" and so forth. Finally, in the fourth phase, the best you can hope for is a compromise. He gets the car, but he's mad because of all the extra chores he has to do. You get some concessions from him, but you still worry about his safety. So what's wrong with this? You ask, isn't compromise a good thing? You give up something you want, the other person gives up something he wants. This is called a lose-lose outcome. Compromise might satisfy the immediate issue, but nobody's ever delighted by a compromise. It certainly doesn't strengthen your relationship, and it usually solves nothing in the long term. The third alternative is actually the opposite of a compromise. A compromise is a lose-lose. A third alternative is a win-win. You're delighted by a third alternative because it's a lot better than anything you've thought of before. Let's see how the 4 steps of the third alternative process differ from the 4 steps of a quarrel that we've just looked at. The first step in going for the third alternative is to ask this magical question. Are you willing to go for a solution that is better than any of us have come up with yet? This revolutionary question drains away all the negative energy. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm simply asking if we can look for a solution that's better than mine or yours. If they say yes, your next step is to ask, what would better look like? The idea is to come up with a clear vision of the future you really want, of the job you really want done. These we call your criteria of success. Once you've defined your criteria of success, you start looking for third alternatives that will meet the criteria. We're looking for a blossoming of new possibilities. You'll know you've arrived by the excitement in the room. The hesitation and the conflict are gone. The third alternative is not only inspiring, but wonderfully practical. We know it will work really well. Let me illustrate how this process works with this story about a third alternative manager. A young man was new at his job. After a few months, he felt he was getting paid too little for the work he was doing. So he took a real risk and went to talk to his new boss about a raise. He didn't know her very well, and she didn't really know him either. But she invited him into her office, and he explained why he was there. Although he hoped she would say yes, he expected her to say no, and he was ready to haggle. But she surprised him by doing neither. Instead, she sat back and said, "Tell me more." So he talked quite a lot about what he'd been doing for the firm, and she listened. She asked him what he thought about the company, its customers, its products. It was odd. He thought the conversation was going to be about money, but instead, it was about him. Then she asked about a certain customer he'd been working with. She wanted to know his ideas for expanding their business with that client, and he did have some thoughts to share. A couple days later, she invited him back into her office. 3 or 4 other people joined in, and she had put up on a whiteboard his ideas for the client. They had quite the discussion. He was excited when they offered him an expanded job with higher pay and responsibility for a new level of service to this important client. The eventual result was a whole line of business, and the young man was ultimately responsible for doubling the size of that firm. This boss had a fine capacity for third alternative thinking. How easy it would have been for her either to refuse his demands or to just give in to them. Instead, she is always looking for the possibility of a third option, a dramatic win-win. Now, in our next video, we'll look at the next step of the third alternative process, which is to find your criteria of success. The second step of the third alternative process is to get everyone's view of what success looks like. We call this step defining the criteria of success. To do this, you actively seek out different views about how to solve the problem. You start by going up to people and saying, "You have a different opinion. I need to listen to you." And then do it. This is an unnatural thing to do. Your instinct is to defend yourself against people who differ from you. So why should you go out of your way to really listen to viewpoints you disagree with? For 2 reasons. First, you'll learn something. Second, you drain all the negative energy out of the conflict. Everybody has a slice of truth. No one has it all. As a third alternative thinker, you recognize that the more slices of truth you have, the more you see things as they really are. If you have truth that I don't have, why wouldn't I come and find you so you can teach me? It's not only natural, but essential for people to have different opinions. Dr. Covey often says that if 2 people have the same opinion, one of them is unnecessary. The second reason for listening deeply to the people you're having problems with is to drain the negative energy out of the conflict. People have a desperate need to be heard and understood. If you were suffocating right at this moment, you wouldn't care about anything except getting air now. But once you get your breath, the need has been satisfied. Like the need for air, the greatest psychological need of a human being is to be understood. When you listen to another person, you give that person psychological air. Only when that vital need is met can you focus on problem solving. Let me illustrate this principle with an actual story of two business leaders caught up in a serious dispute that had turned into a legal battle. One of them was our client. When he learned about seeking the third alternative, he decided to try it with his opponent in the lawsuit. He rang up the other party, who was also a company president, and asked if they could meet to discuss the situation. The other president didn't want to meet, but my friend explained what he was trying to do and why. Listen, he said, I'm not going to bring my attorney. You can bring yours. And if your attorney counsels you not to say anything, then don't say anything. So on that basis, they agreed to meet. The man showed up with his attorney, and they all sat down at a conference table. Our client pulled out a writing pad and said, "First, I want to see if I understand your position in this suit." Hesitantly, the other man started to talk. He laid out the problem from his perspective, which had something to do with a dispute over product ownership. Our client just listened and made notes. At last he said, "Let me see if I've got it." He then restated as fully and completely as he could what the other man had said and asked, "Is that your position?" The man looked over his notes and said, Yes, that's it. But there are 2 points you're not clear about." The man's lawyer interrupted. I don't think we need to go into all those details here." But surprisingly, the man turned to his lawyer and said, "I know I asked you to be here, but why don't we just try this?" And the other president carefully described his remaining 2 points. Our client wrote them down, restated them, and then asked, "Is that a complete and fair understanding of your position?" "Yes, it is." "Is there anything else I need to understand?" "No, that covers it." "Good," our client said. "Now, would you be willing to listen to me the way I've listened to you?" There was a pause. But then the man said, "Fire away." And a two-way dialogue began. At last they began to understand each other's slices of truth. Several hours later, these two men emerged from that meeting with a third alternative, a solution to their problem that saved the relationship, avoided all the legal costs, and laid the foundation for better ways of working together in the future. The whole situation changed. Now, what do we learn from this experience about seeking third alternatives? We learn that it takes only one person in a dispute to say, "You see things differently. I need to listen to you." Our client listened carefully to understand the other man's criteria of success. What would be a win for him? By doing so, he earned the right to be heard in his turn. As they listened deeply to one another, understanding overcame all the negative energy, and at last, they were ready to go on to a third alternative. Can you think of situations where you could use this step to diffuse a conflict and get to understanding? In the next video, we'll show you how to take that next step, to move forward and create third alternatives of your own. In this video, we'll go over the third step of the third alternative process, which is actually creating third alternatives. The search for a third alternative starts when you ask someone, "Are you willing to go for a solution that's better than anything we've thought of before?" If the answer is yes, you can start experimenting with possible solutions that will meet your criteria of success. Please note that I said solutions, plural. The search for a third alternative almost always involves many possible alternatives. We create models, we throw old things together in new ways, we turn our thinking upside down. We work in a freewheeling mode, confident that possible solutions are abundant. One of my favorite examples of third alternative thinking is Ward Clapham, a former officer of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The world of a police officer is a classic two-alternative world, divided into good guys and bad guys. When Ward became chief of police in Richmond, British Columbia, youth crime was out of hand in that town. The police department was typical. They saw their job as catching bad guys and getting the kids off the streets. But Ward Clapham was looking for third alternatives. One day he asked himself, we spend most of our time catching kids doing something wrong. What if it were the other way around? What would happen if we were to catch kids doing something right? We give them tickets for breaking the law. What if we gave them tickets for upholding the law, for doing something helpful? Thus was born the idea of positive ticketing. Each year, police in Richmond issue about 40,000 positive tickets that are good for anything from a slice of pizza to a sporting event or a video game. They give these tickets to kids they find doing something good, like wearing a helmet while riding a motorbike, or waiting for the light to change at the crosswalk, or coming out of the library with a book. Now, says Ward Clapham, the kids run to us instead of running away from us. A big problem in Richmond was with juveniles who would race each other in their cars at night on the streets. These street races were extremely dangerous, with several fatalities each year. Finally, a police officer was killed trying to stop a street race. Angry, the police department wanted to do a major crackdown. But Ward thought differently. The real job to be done, he realized, was not to lock up kids for street racing, but to convince them to stop street racing in the first place. His third alternative was to buy a little sports car and turn it into a police race car, complete with siren and lights and lots of souped-up accessories, and to show it at the local car shows where street racers like to hang out. The beautiful car attracted a lot of attention and gave the police officers a chance to get to know the racers, to understand their world, and to persuade them to stop racing on city streets. Now, since Ward started this campaign, there has not been a single street racing fatality in his city. Another time, police received a call that some thugs were blocking traffic by playing hockey in the street. Ward pulled up in his big police cruiser to find that the thugs were actually some very young teenagers. And when they saw him, they froze, not knowing what to do. Now, Ward had two alternatives. He could chase them away, or he could arrest and cite them. But he went for a third alternative. You have two choices, he said sternly. I can give you each a ticket, or I can play hockey with you. To the amazement of these kids, he grabbed a stick and joined the game. Now, why did he do this? He says, my criterion of success is strong relationships. I think about this city not just for today, but for a generation to come. Those kids will never be afraid of the police again. They'll think of us as their friends. That game lasted only a few more minutes, but the goodwill created will last a lifetime. Positive tickets, a police race car, many other third alternatives have totally changed the relationship between law enforcement and the youth of Richmond, BC. The results speak for themselves. Juvenile crime dropped by 41% within 2 years. The cost of processing youth offenders fell by 90%. Repeat offenses dropped from 61% to 12%. That's the power of third alternatives. So, what do we learn from Ward Clapham? How does he come up with these results? First, He has escaped the trap of too alternative thinking. He's neither soft on crime, nor does he have to prove he is tough. He is beyond both. He's willing to look for something better. Second, he has a firm vision of what success looks like. A city that's crime-free because people respect each other. Third, he is always looking for third alternatives. Doing the surprising thing, sometimes doing the opposite of what's expected, like joining the hockey game instead of arresting everybody. He turns the conventional solutions upside down. In the next video, we'll show you how to know when you've actually arrived at a third alternative that will work for you. In this video, we will talk about the fourth and final step of arriving at third alternatives. How do we know when we've arrived at a third alternative? We know the third alternative by the excitement in the room. People stop hesitating and being defensive. A burst of creative energy comes with a third alternative. And we recognize it when we feel it. It's like discovering a hidden treasure. We know the third alternative when we are no longer interested in old fights and old assumptions. The third alternative transforms our relationships. We become partners in discovery instead of enemies on a battlefield. We wonder why we never saw it before. All at once, we see clearly. When properly understood, the third alternative is the highest achievement in life. It taps into our creative potential and unleashes our unique insights. Everything that's really new in this world is a third alternative. Let me tell you a true story to illustrate the power of this moment of discovery. I once conducted a workshop in Canada with about 40 business people from many different companies. At one point, I asked if anyone in the room would volunteer for an experiment in finding third alternatives. A nicely dressed, soft-spoken man in the front row raised his hand. We'll call him Ronaldo. I asked him what his situation was. "I own a large hardware store," he began. "I've worked for many years to build it up, and I have a wonderful clientele. It's been a good business, and I'd like to see it grow, but I think it's all over." You see, 2 big box retail home centers are going to be built in my town. Not 1, but 2, and I'm situated halfway between them. They're huge and powerful. I surely won't be able to compete with them on price, and I'm afraid my customers won't have much choice but to leave me. Well, I gulped and turned to the group, which had become very quiet. You could tell that everybody felt sympathy for this man. "All right," I said, "we've got to save Ronaldo. We've got to come up with a third alternative to quitting or fighting a losing battle. What can Ronaldo do to keep his customers? What can we come up with that no one has ever thought of before?" Well, the group went to work. They took markers and chart paper and feverishly recorded ideas for making Ronaldo's retail store thrive. It was loud and chaotic, a delightful kind of chaos that you see when people are excited about their ideas. When the time was up, it was obvious that people couldn't wait to share their ideas, and the ideas flew. There were hundreds of suggestions, like, "Why wait for customers to come to you? Go to them. Put a truck on the road full of products and carry it to building sites." Or, "You have seasoned staff members. Turn your store into a learning center where people can get real advice on construction projects from real experts." Or, "Start a just-in-time service. If a customer calls or texts and needs a tool, deliver it." Another one said, "If I want 1 nail, sell me 1 nail, so I don't have to buy a whole package of them." Well, the most fruitful set of suggestions came from the women in the room. Many of them talked about how home centers and hardware stores intimidated them and how much they would like a store that catered to their needs and interests. Ronaldo should hire women, develop classes for women, find out which products women needed most for home projects. One said, "How about a hardware store just for women?" Well, it was the most productive third alternative session I have ever seen. The many professions and perspectives in the room served up a rich mix of ideas, and Ronaldo blushed with pleasure as he sat down. He said, "Now, I have hope." In the following months, he totally reconceived his business to counter the threat from the big box home centers. Where the home centers use an untrained staff to sell generic products, Ronaldo served up amazing expertise and personal attention with a special outreach to women customers. Whatever the big box retailers did, Ronaldo countered it. On one side of town was Big Box A, and on the other side of town was Big Box B. They fought it out for market share in a classic two alternative showdown, although there wasn't much difference between them. Meanwhile, Ronaldo's third alternative hardware store sits in the middle, delighting a growing clientele with his exceptional blend of service and skill. In the end, the search for the third alternative is our greatest opportunity to stop the unproductive wrangling that takes us nowhere, to open our minds and listen to each other and create new solutions for ourselves. What else but third alternative thinking can ever produce the striking new solutions we so desperately need for our toughest challenges? Now, over the last few days, we've walked you through the third alternative process. You've seen the benefits. But you're probably still asking yourself, how do I apply this to my situation, to my own problems? You're a valued member of the Stephan Covey community. We want to give back to you for your support. So we're going to give you free access to 5 webinar workshops about third alternative problem solving and decision making. In these workshops, we'll dive deeply into the third alternative process. You'll be able to process your own issues. You'll be able to interact with not only our experienced consultants, but also other participants like you, asking your questions and getting advice the way Ronaldo did. These 5 90-minute workshops, which are valued at $149 each, start in January 2012 and will be held many times so you can participate when you want. If you're interested in this offer, click below so we can get the information we need to connect you to the workshops. Now, this offer is not contingent on buying the book, The Third Alternative, but you'll get a lot more out of this opportunity if you get it and read it. You will also get access to several especially prepared streaming videos that give you deeper insights into the third alternative. So, I encourage you to click below to get your copy of the third alternative and start solving your own most difficult problems.